has given us and the wonderful opportunity to come and to share His Word. We're living in a world where we meet challenges each and every day of our lives. And as some people have said that God did not promise us a world that is free of those challenges and those trials and those problems. But in those trials and in those problems, God has promised never to leave us. So we can always safely trust that God is there. And He will always come through. This morning I'd like to share on a topic. The title is Faithful and True. Faithful and True. In this sharing this morning, we are going to look at Daniel chapter 6. Pretty much the whole chapter 6. In Daniel chapter 6, it's a very interesting story that we are going to look at. Within this chapter, we are going to look at the main character of the book, Daniel, and part of the life that he led. We meet Daniel at the beginning of this book in Daniel chapter 1 as a young boy of around 17 years who was a slave captured from Israel and taken to a foreign land in Babylon. And our first picture of Daniel as a young man, we meet someone who has a life that is directed and controlled by principle. He is not someone who is controlled by the environment in which he is. These days, we are in a world where sometimes people think it is not good to be different. We are living in a world that believes it is fashionable to be common, to be like everybody else. Don't stand out. But Daniel is presented to us right at the beginning of chapter 1 as someone who never worried to be different as long as it was something to do with his God. So Daniel, in Daniel chapter 1 verse 8, the Bible tells us Daniel purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself with the meats from the king's table. Daniel, as a slave in this country of Babylon, was given the opportunity to be treated to the king's own meals. But when Daniel looked at the king's table, he realized that this was not a diet a person who believed in God needed to follow. And Daniel decided in his heart, when the Bible uses the term purposed in his heart, this is something that is coming out of deep thought and thinking. Daniel considered the opportunities that were before him, and he also considered what was at stake. If he was to be in good terms with the king, that would allow him or make him a favorite of the king, and that would open a lot of opportunities in his life in this strange land he was. After all, he was just a slave. But Daniel looked at that he can gain all this commendation and the applause of the world, but that would cost his faith in God. So he chose to be different. And so the Bible says he purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself with the king's food. So he stands as an icon to young people, as someone who had a character that could not be affected by the situations that he found himself in. You and me can agree that his condition, it was not a situation that was favorable for him to practice his Christianity, was it? It was not a favorable environment. But in that unfavorable environment, Daniel refused to compromise his principles, his faith, and his belief in God. So he stands as an icon to young people. But at the same time, Daniel also stands an icon of character to the elderly people. When we come to chapter 6, we are meeting Daniel when he is almost around 80 years old. And we see the faith that he had when he was 17 years, when he came to this land of Babylon. He maintained that faith untainted up to his old age. And so we meet Daniel in chapter 6 as an elderly statesman, as a politician, but still someone who was true to duty as a needle to a pole. So the account of Daniel is really a very interesting and a big challenge to us as we look at the challenges that we face as we live in the world today. So our text this morning is actually coming from chapter 6, verse 4, where it says, "Then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him." So we are going to consider that thought in the things that happened in this chapter. So when we begin to look at this from verse 1 to verse 9, we find Daniel being appointed. Daniel spanned between two empires. He came to Babylon under the old Babylonian kingdom. When Babylon fell and the Mede and Persian took over, Daniel was still around. So he was a politician in the Babylonian kingdom, and he was also a politician even in the new empire, the Mede and the Persian empire. So we read from verse 1 that it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. So Daniel, who had won the favor of the previous kings in the Babylonian kingdom, won the favor of Darius, who was a ruler in during the Medo-Persian Empire. And Darius, who perhaps not much is said about his background, but perhaps he was chosen by Cyrus as the leader of the Babylonian part of his empire. So Darius decided to divide the Babylonian Empire under the Mede-Persians into 120 provinces. And each of these provinces was headed by somebody like a provincial governor. And these 120 people were answerable to 3 presidents who were over the 120. And out of these 3 presidents, the first was Daniel. And that was not a small position, was it? In fact, Daniel was second to Darius himself. Because you had Darius, the ruler, Daniel coming after him, heading the 3 presidents under him, under whose were these 120 governors of the provinces. Now, given the background that this person had a foreign background, he was a slave in this land, the people he served with did not like him. So they were very eager to find a fault, to find a problem with what Daniel was doing. So they wanted to find a reason to pull him down from that high position that he held. So the Bible tells us that these people decided to find a fault with Daniel. But what we read from verse 4 is rather interesting. Because it says these people knew that, okay, he is a person, he has a very long period as a politician. Certainly, there should be so much room to find fault with what he does. You know, obviously, when people stay in a position for too long, they tend to relax, isn't it? They tend to become careless. So with such a long period, it was not difficult for these people to assume there should be some skeletons in what Daniel had been doing as a politician. You know, people normally say every person has their own skeletons in their closets, right? People have secrets. They have things that they don't think people know about. So they began to search for these. And mind you, these were people who had worked with him, right? And if there were any people who could know if Daniel had certain skeletons, these were the people. Because he had worked with them. So they started to look for problems in his life. And when I was reading this verse, it kind of got my attention. Perhaps these people started to look at how Daniel performed his duties as the first president. They looked at how he related to his juniors. They looked at how he talked to them. They looked at what he was doing with them. And they could not find any problem with that. And they said, perhaps let's look at how he has done some state businesses. Maybe there's some corruption somewhere. Maybe there's some advantage that Daniel had taken for himself in delivering his duties as a president. And they looked at all the books and the accounts and they found them up to date. And perhaps I was thinking these people may have decided to look at where Daniel hung out when he was not on duty. The kinds of people, the places he visited, the things he did in his free time. And they searched through all that. How many faults did they find? As the Bible records, they found none. If I ask you, if the people you relate to were to look for a fault in you, how long will it take them to find the fault? Right? You know, when you're searching on Google, you type a search term, so it brings up the results. So it tells you like, search took 1 second. Pages that have come up, maybe 26,000, 30,000, 100,000. Right? Maybe somebody could just Google your life for a second, and how many pages would come? This is a very important call to us who call ourselves Christians. We are not Christians only when we are in the church. We are Christians in the church, but more importantly, outside the church. The world read what we do. Paul said, you are letters that are actually written and they're read by people. What do people read about my life? What do people read about your life? How do you deal with the people that you work with? How do you relate with people in your free time? What kind of amusements do you enjoy? What kind of places do you like to go to? If people looked at that, would they find a consistent Christian? Or they would find so many contradictions in our profession? The biggest challenge against the Christianity are not unbelievers. It's the Christians themselves. Is that right? Gandhi said, I love Christianity, but not the Christians. Christianity is very good. The problem of Christianity is not the Christianity itself. It's the people who call themselves Christians. Why did he say that? Because we preach one thing and we live another thing. But here was Daniel. He was faithful, not only when he was under the radar, not only when someone was observing him, even when nobody was observing him, he was still faithful. And when you come to think of what Jesus said later on, that we need to be perfect because our Father is perfect. People today have said it is impossible to be perfect, right? You have heard that. People have said it's not possible in this world to be perfect. You can never be perfect. Well, which world was Daniel living in? Which world was he living in? This same world. And with a very long political career, if they are the one group of people in our community, in our society today, that are least trusted, are politicians. Right? Maybe you don't follow politics that much, but if you follow politics, you can agree with me. If there is one group of people that are not trusted, are politicians. If there's one group of people that top the list on being corrupt, are politicians. You can follow all the cases against politicians going across the globe. And here was a classical example of a faithful politician who was also a Christian. Sometimes people say, you can never be a faithful Christian if you're a politician. Wrong. Daniel was a faithful Christian and he was a politician. The problem is not where you are. The problem is who you are. It's not your profession that's the problem, but it's the kind of person you are. Daniel was faithful as a politician, and he could have been faithful as a teacher. He could have been faithful as anything. In any career, he could have placed him. Because the problem was not his involvement, but the character that he had. So the people looked for a problem. They searched for that problem in all aspects of his life, private and public, but the Bible says they found nothing against him. There was no charge they could bring against Daniel because he was perfect. He was faithful. And there was no error or fault found in him. And Daniel's success, as far as the Bible is concerned, was because he had this excellent spirit in him. He had a life guided by the Spirit of God. And God always guided him, and he listened to what God expected of him. And he was very successful in his career without compromising his character. And interesting enough, you know, sometimes people believe that if you want to make it to the top, then you cannot be really principled. You can make it. People say people who are faithful always finish last. Right? Then people who are faithful finish last. It's those who are not faithful who finish first. But that's not true. Daniel, his excellent character appealed even to people who were never believers. And that's the very reason why Nebuchadnezzar trusted him, and after that kingdom ended, Darius came and trusted the same Daniel and placed him over the 120 presidents of the kingdom. He is an icon that you can be successful while maintaining your character as a Christian. Okay. Now, what happened after that? So when we read from verse 5, it said, "Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." When these people were busy trying to find fault with Daniel, one thing struck them. Continuously in their search, they found someone who was so much committed to his belief and to his God. To an extent that they were convinced that if we have to find something with this person, it will not be in his life in general, but it has to be concerning his God. How much glorious would it be if people would find fault with us concerning how much we believe? So these people planned out, said, you see, we cannot find anything wrong with this person, but let's attack his religion. If we attack his religion, we're surely going to get him. So the people went to the king and proposed to Darius that, you see, we believe that, you know, you are a great king. And for 30 days, we want every person in this kingdom, regardless of their status, not to pray to any other god except to the king. These people came as people who loved the king. So they were trying to make the king feel that he is actually the greatest in the empire. Just we feel we should have this just 1 month, just 30 days. No one should pray to anybody else except the king. And when we do this, you have to put it in writing that if anyone would go against this, then consequences would follow. The king agreed and signed. The Medo and Persians, one interesting thing about their laws was that once an agreement has been signed and sealed, it can never be changed. It will have to be carried out to the letter. So they got the king to sign for this kind of declaration. And we find when we read from verse 10 to 17, how did Daniel respond to this? You know, one interesting thing that I was also thinking is, Daniel was the second in command. But it's apparent he was not here when these people were making this rule. with the king. Right? He wasn't there. They sidelined him. And Daniel comes later and realizes the king has signed this law. How did you respond to that situation? From verse 10 say, well, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Instead of Daniel being scared and afraid with the rule and the command that had been given, Daniel went into his room and opened the windows so everyone could see. It was not a secret that he was praying to God and not the king. Mind you, Daniel was a faithful civil servant. He always respected the king, just as we are expected to respect those who are above us. But when it's a question of respecting them or God, then the answer is clear. It's not up to debate. The apostles put it rightly, would rather obey God rather than who? Rather than man. If the laws of man stand against the laws of God, a Christian has no option. It's not something for us to sit down and discuss how we do with this. The answer is clear. If the laws of man contradict the laws of God, our first priority is to follow the laws of God, irregardless of the consequences. Daniel pretty well knew that going against the law that the king had signed could mean very serious consequences. But Daniel knew that this was not a matter that was up to debate. He would rather follow God than man. How much does God mean to us? How far are we willing to go in respect of our faith? What are we willing to leave, sacrifice, to maintain our faith and respect for God? We meet so many challenges, just like Daniel met. We also are called at times to make similar decisions. How do we respond to those challenges? Needless to say that oftentimes we fail. We compromise on these principles and we fear people that we see and how they're going to think about us. And may God help us. When the laws and requirements of men contradict what God expects of us, we need not think about it. It ought to be automatic that we would rather obey God than obey man. So we see Daniel went straight ahead and prayed to God, giving thanks to God and keeping his windows open. People did not need to have problems to know that Daniel was praying to the true God of heaven. Because Daniel knew that there is no any other name that we should worship except that of God. And so quickly the enemies of Daniel caught him praying. And the matter was reported to the king. And according to the rule that the people had made the king sign, the king at this point now realized that it was all a trap. These people had a person they wanted. The issue was not about honoring the king. The issue was about getting Daniel. And the king realized too late that he actually was fooled. Unfortunately, he could not reverse his decision. So Daniel had to be thrown in the den of the lions. Read with me from verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was so displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Now, O king, that the law of the Medes and the Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded that they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver you. The king realized that he was cheated. The people were after Daniel. And the king tried to think of ways to prevent this from happening. But the people said, you know what, king? Now it's no longer you as a king. The point is, you signed. It doesn't matter what you think. If these people really cared about the king to be respected, they should have listened to alternative view. But they say, you see, at this point, you are not a problem anymore. We got you to sign a paper. That's all that matters at this point. We don't care about your opinion. This man is going. And the king was distressed that he did that. He was displeased with himself. And what is interesting in what the king says is when Daniel was being thrown into the den of lions, the king said something. He said, the God you save will deliver you from that den of lions. How did the king know that? Remember what happened prior to this when the 3 Hebrew boys were brought to the fiery furnace. When they were brought there, Nebuchadnezzar asked them which God would save you from that furnace. Right? And the God of heaven demonstrated that no situation was too difficult for him. He saved them out of that burning furnace. And this history lived on. People knew there was a God these people believed in. And this God that was believed by these Hebrew boys was not just any other God. And Darius was familiar with that story. And with his own contact and time that he spent with Daniel, he had learned and appreciated that he was someone who believed, and not just something that was an empty belief, but it was a belief that could change things. And even the heathen king believed that the God of heaven could save Daniel in that situation. So the king said, yes, I have made my own mistakes. Sign those papers, you're going to be thrown in there. But take heart. The God that you believe, the way I've seen you, I'm sure he will deliver you out of the lion's den. You know, sometimes we may feel that we are believers, but the world does not notice. Well, the world does. The world notices. We may not know, but people know. If we are faithful in what we do, if we are committed in what we believe, the world knows that. And Darius, of all the people, it was not another church member who came to comfort him and say, but brother, take heart. No, it was the king himself, who was not a believer. And he comes and said, Daniel, I believe the God that you serve is able to save you out of this. When we are faithful, we can witness to people, we can testify of the God that we believe in from what we do. Even when we don't say anything, the world understands. And the king understood the God Daniel actually served. With time, let me just quickly try to summarize this. So in the end, Daniel is thrown in the lion's den, and early in the morning, the king spent that night. He was very much in trouble. He did not have a peaceful rest because he believed that this person, one of the person that they depended on in this kingdom, because of his faithfulness to duty and whatever he was doing for the goodness of the Medo-Persian kingdom, the king was not amused that that person was thrown in the lion's den. The king had a very difficult night. And the Bible says early in the morning, the king rose and went to that place where Daniel was actually put in the lion's den, and the den was closed and sealed with the king's seal and that of his lords, to make sure nobody would actually take him out of that. The world may lock you in. The world may bring all these things around you and box you in. But the good news is, no matter how much man might try to prevent, they cannot prevent the hand of God from reaching out to you. Remember when Jesus was put in the grave, they sealed the grave with the seal and put guards there. But even the grave could not hold the life that was in that grave. Jesus rose and broke all the seals, a living one. And here was Daniel in the lion's den, shut out from all people who could have helped him. The seals were placed there to make sure nobody would access that. The king goes there in the morning and he shouts even before he gets there. Because he believed the God Daniel believed in was actually going to save him. And Daniel responds, for the God of heaven sent his angels to shut down the lion's mouth. And I was not harmed. And the king quickly ordered Daniel taken out of that. But now look at the last part, how the story ends. Daniel is rescued from that because the God that we serve is able and is capable. If we honor him, he has promised to honor us. God has said, tell those people who honor me that it shall be well with them. Even if they walk through the waters will not sweep them. Even if they pass through the fires will not consume them. That's what Isaiah says. God has promised that he will never forget his people. He has put their names on the palms of his hands, and he will never forget them. Isaiah said, you know, a mother can forget her own suckling child, but God will never forget his people. And so God remembered Daniel in the lion's den as he remembered his friends in the fiery furnace, and he came at the right time. And Daniel and his life was preserved. God expects us to trust him. God expects us to be faithful in what we know. If we are faithful and honest, God has promised that he will never leave us. No amount of negative things around us would actually shut God out of our lives. He will always come to the rescue of his people. There's a familiar song that is sung, that God will do it again. Right? He will do it again. Just as he did in the old times, he is ready to do it even today. If we are faithful, no matter what kind of challenges our lives are presented with, if we are faithful, God is ready to do it again. Just as he did in those times, he will do it again in your life. What kind of challenges do you have? God is promising that he is the same God, the same in the past, the same today, and the same forever. What he has done for others, it is not a secret, and he will do that for each one of us. But what God expects and calls from us is that we be faithful to him. We be true to duty. We be true and follow him regardless of the consequences. The consequences, God says, leave those to me. Your business is to obey. If you obey, you have done your part. Whatever results from there, negative or positive, leave that to God. He will take care of that. If we believe in him, God will never leave us out. For he has promised, and his word is sure. Daniel lives as a testimony to that. He believed in God, and he never compromised. He allowed the challenges to come, but as long as he was in terms with his God, the world did not matter. And God honored him. He saved him. He rescued him. He always comes. Some people say, God always comes. Though sometimes to us it might appear like he comes at the wrong time or when it's late. But I'm happy to tell you that God is never late. He may not come when you expect him. But when he does, he will never be late. He always comes on time. May God help us to trust in him regardless of the consequences.